Thank you for joining us for today's Tech Forum session. I'm Tom Richardson, the Bibliographic Manager at BookNet Canada. Welcome to Taking Care of Data, Everyday Trials for the Modern Metadata Manager. Before I get started, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous people of the lands that we are all on today, an acknowledgement that is deeply personal due to this virtual platform and the wide range of locations people are calling in today from. Today, I am broadcasting from the traditional territories of the original nations of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to visit nativeland.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. BookNet Canada endorses the call to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space-making in the book industry. In the spirit of that acknowledgement, I confirm our responsibility in mending the sacred hoop with Canada's Indigenous peoples, to be an ally to all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and to unite and work alongside with one another. Now, if you are having difficulty with Zoom or have any tech-related questions, please direct your questions to tech support in the chat. You can find the option by using the drop-down menu above the chat box, the chat text box, my apologies, or you can email techforum, one word, at booknetcanada, one word.ca. We're providing live ASL and closed captioning for this presentation. To see the captions, please find the live transcript button in the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. Click on it and choose Show Subtitle. If during the presentation you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A panel found in the bottom menu. You will also have an option of asking them anonymously there too. Lastly, we'd like to remind the attendees of the Code of Conduct. Please do be kind, be inclusive, be respectful of others, including their privacy. Be aware of your words and actions, and please report any violations to techforum@booknetcanada.ca. Do not harass speakers, hosts, or attendees or record these sessions. We have a zero tolerance policy. And you can find the entire Code of Conduct at techforum.booknetcanada.ca/code of conduct. Before we get to the discussion with the panelists, we wanted to ask two quick poll questions to get a sense of who's attending the webinar today. The first question is, are you a metadata professional in the publishing industry? Yes, no, unsure. And we'll give you about 30 seconds to respond, no particular rush. It usually takes people a little bit of time to find all the controls and stuff like that. 60% of you are people in the publishing industry, about a third are not, and 7% are unsure. The second question is, how much time is spent on direct or indirect metadata responsibilities? Choose the response closest to your working reality. 100% of the time, 75% of your time, 50% of your time, 25% of your time, less than 25% of your time. And again, we'll just have to wait for a moment for some results to come back in. And here we go. How much time is spent on direct or indirect metadata? About 17%, about a fifth, consider it 100% of their time. 14%, 75%, another 17% consider it 50. About a third, a third of you consider it 25% of your time, and 21% less than 25% of your time. So that's good, that's quite helpful, thank you. Now, to introduce our speakers. Eulalie Lumsden is a business operation analyst at Rabuco Coton. I'm sorry, Rabu. This is why you should always practice all names before you start a webinar. Rakuten Kobo, where she is responsible for the quality assurance of Kobo's digital content, provides publisher support. Nick Hilton manages ebook production, metadata systems, and the distribution of print and digital formats for Coach House Books. And finally, but by no means least, Marion Jans, System Manager at Raincoast Books. She's an information technology professional with more than 21 years of experience. So we're just going to dive straight in. And the first question, which I guess I will ask Nick Hilton to respond to initially. In lieu of reading a full formal biography, which are available online, and we'll drop links into the chat, please introduce yourselves by sharing how you work with metadata and describe the tools you use. Nick, give it a shot.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Nick Hilton, and you can read my bio, as Tom said, on the website, but my position is Digital and Distribution Manager. And how I use metadata every day. I answered 100%. Maybe technically it should have been 90% if I had that option in the poll that we just did. But I work on it regularly, and the tools that I use mainly are Book One and CoreSource. Those are the metadata systems that I use. I guess, well, I am the publisher representative of this panel today, so be curious to learn what other publishers might use as well. But those are the two main ones. Of course, I would assume most people have this answer as well, working in metadata. I also use a lot of spreadsheets depending on different people's needs in terms of providing information. And we also use FileMaker, I would include in my suite of tools.
Okay, Yuli, how about yourself?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Yuli Lumsden. My pronouns are she, her. I work at Kobo as a business operations analyst. This is actually a new role to me. I used to work on the data side of publishing at House of Anansi Press, but now I'm working on the retailer side, helping to problem solve for publishers and customers. So in my role, I receive incoming Onyx feeds from publishers and also receive customer reported issues with Kobo content. So at Kobo, we use a content management system where we can view all the metadata sent to us by publishers, how many revisions they send, and if metadata ingestions are successful, or if there's a failure, which we can help to guide publishers through.
And Marion.
Hi, I'm Marion Jans. I am systems manager at Raincoast Books. So Raincoast represents over 100 domestic and foreign publishers, and we are the biggest Canadian-owned supplier, ranked #3 in Canada in terms of BookNet market share. We handle only physical books and supporting metadata. We have approximately 100,000 active titles, and in our 90,000 square foot warehouse in Richmond, we currently stock approximately 45,000 titles. As I mentioned, I'm systems manager. I have 2 programmers reporting to me, and we sometimes use external resources as well. In terms of use of metadata, we've developed our own proprietary digital catalog system, which we've sold to a select group of US and UK publishers. And we maintain both North American and European data conventions, as well as BISAC, BIC, and US and European dimensions and prices. As far as my particular role in terms of the data, being the systems manager, I typically, first of all, I do process the Onyx data as the first step, but I generally am the person to whom all questions land, whether it's sales and marketing, whether it's the inventory coordinators, whoever. It generally lands in the lap of the systems department. So while I may not be analyzing the metadata myself, I certainly have exposure to it in many different capacities.
Okay. The next question given that Yuli has just started at Kobo, this might not be the most fair one to ask of her, but for if she has any comments, she's more than welcome to provide them. But for Nick or Marion, sort of a two-part question. If there are pain points, ineffective tools, or problems in metadata that you're looking to find solutions for, and I think just in general, I mean, when we were asking about tools, I think we wanted to have also a sense about, I mean, how do you determine what metadata your business needs to support? And what business needs are you looking to your metadata to provide you the marketing support or the business support that you require? Marion, you're still on camera. Why don't you start?
Sure. So one of the things that we find is that Onyx conventions don't support bookstores sideline in puzzles, games, and gift. Generally, the BISAC codes we get for that would be the non-BISAC code. And we also don't get the actual, BISAC code, and we also don't get binding code associated with it. One of the examples is, what is the binding code for something like reading socks, which is in our gift classification. Right now, Raincoast is creating a new B2B site, which we hope to launch in 2022, that will specialize in better identifying, categorizing, and selling gift product. One of the things that myself and our CEO are working on right now is just looking at the metadata and trying to determine how best to classify certain items, which in some cases may not be that complicated, but as I mentioned before, the number of unique items that we have makes this type of classification quite challenging. One of the other things that we find quite challenging is the quality of data that we get from publishers. This was raised more by our Publishing Group Canada division, PGC, that operates out of Toronto. A lot of the data that they get from the UK isn't great. It seems that the UK publishers struggle with BISAC codes because they don't use them very often. And sometimes they're either incorrectly selected or not selected at all. And so we believe that possibly when we implement THEMA, which is on our list of tasks to do, but we haven't specified a timeline for it yet, that may help us in better classifying books as long as our publishers are on that same page. There's also things around formatting of certain fields, and sometimes it's more of a cultural situation rather than the data itself. One of the challenges we face is that if we fix metadata in our system to properly classify an item, for example, the next Onyx feed will clobber it. And so we need to find a way to get around that, or at least rely on our publishers to provide us with more accurate information. The last thing that I wanted to highlight is something that we're working on as well, which is to add a field to our systems that hold Canadian pub date. Right now, for US publishers, we add a certain number of days to the pub date to accommodate any shipping delays. But again, that can get overwritten when we receive information from our publishers. So a number of challenges we face. Many of them are logged. I do a lot of logging of requests from our users, and that's one of them that has been logged. And one last task that we've been looking at quite a bit is how to process the data in a more timely fashion. We get, for example, Onyx data, whether it's via Onyx or whether it's spreadsheets from our publishers. It goes through a number of different people before it finally gets uploaded into our system. And we considered doing some automatic uploads, but there hasn't really been a consensus amongst our users as to what we can automatically load versus what needs to be reviewed before it can be uploaded into our system and then subsequently sent out to our our recipients, like BookNet, like Book Manager, etc.
That was informative and very helpful. One just quick question. At the beginning, we were talking about the non-book product tracking and the classification problems. Am I correct in assuming that you're not relying on Onyx to drive that data and are setting up a separate system, or are you seeing Onyx as a way of getting the information? I mean, it does have some capacity to handle non-book products, but it's not great, and it's not trying to be great. So do you need something outside of Onyx is my question?
I'm not sure, Tom. I think, first of all, we don't discount or eliminate any item that is classified as gift. We bring in all Onyx data for which we have for items that we have in our system, and store that information. So it's more, perhaps at some point in time, there might be some other mechanism to get additional information, but right now we're more or less mining the data, looking at what we have based on what we find in the data that we're given. So we might look at things like what's in the item's description, what's in the title, and other pieces of information. So we might look for the word puzzle in any one of the fields that we're storing, that kind of thing. I'm just trying to think of I think it's mostly fields that we already store that we use in order to determine how to classify them. And like I said, myself and our CEO have been working on that quite extensively over the past while, just working on the data that we have in our system.
Okay, thanks very much. Nick?
Hi, yeah. A couple of things I can talk about for definitely pain points and effective tools. I think the biggest pain point for us and for me in my role is just the proliferation of data and the sources of that data. And I can talk about that later at a different point, but just where I'm getting the information in terms of narrative metadata specifically, most specifically. And the BISACs and keywords, if I can drill down to that, is something that we're finding them more challenging at Coach House, just to make sure that we're making informed decisions, like the best decisions for our marketing needs. Metadata is supposed to support marketing. And so I guess one of my pain points, specifically in my role as digital and distribution manager, is not being certain where my role ends in those specific functions and where marketing begins and ends. Like, how much should I be paying attention to that and have informed decisions? Who's deciding on the BISAC codes within our team? We're a small team. There's only 7 of us, but I know I worked for 2 different academic publishers prior to Coach House. It was a challenge at both of those places as well. So just making sure that we're making the best decisions in terms of keywords and BISACs that I believe of. There's other aspects, of course, but those 2 are really important components for marketing and getting our books out there and in the right places. And another pain point is just clunky interfaces in the metadata systems that I use. And of course, these are giant systems, and there's always metadata is only as good as the people behind it. And so if I make a mistake, then that is therefore a metadata mistake. My boss, Alana Wilcox, just said this morning that it's easier to find, of course, the metadata failures rather than identify the successes. And I think that is absolutely true. So I wanted to repeat that to everyone here. But yeah, so just making human error, but also error in those systems, and just, like I said, the clunky interfaces that I sometimes, some aspects of the interfaces that I find difficult to use. I'll give one quick example without getting into too specifics, but we've just recently identified an issue. We were working on our spring 2022 titles, and I had all the BISACs entered for those lists of titles, and then a week later, every single title had one BISAC change to a cookbook BISAC code, and we don't publish cookbooks, and I'm not sure how that happened. It was a system issue, not a human failure issue. But of course, those BISACs have fed out, and we had to scramble to fix it. And then, and we're still trying to find the underlying issue. Hopefully, I'm looking like every 5 hours now at all my titles to make sure that some other BISAC hasn't magically turned to a cookbook subject. So that's just one small example of just silly, just big system issues. And there's lots of we always say at Coaches that metadata is like playing a giant game of whack-a-mole on a regular basis. It's a good thing I like playing that game at Chuck E. Cheese. I always did. So I guess I'm in the right role, but it is just putting out little fires like that. I think just a lot of system issues are one of the biggest challenges that we face.
I can amplify a little bit of that by just noting that in any time, in my experience, anytime like 90% of the data is good, it is the 10% of the data that makes everyone say that the data is unusable.
Exactly.
And it can literally be that bad. One other just question specific though, you didn't mention thema, which is in a sense more like keywords than BISAC is, and offers kind of a bridge. And just wondering if you were considering using it to.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, and I anticipated possibly discussing it later as well, but I can answer that here. We aren't using thema codes right now, but it is on our list of goals for the coming year. I suppose it's on our list of immediate things to start doing. Why we haven't been doing it yet or started on it is just a lack of resources, not that we don't see a need for it or want to do it, but we do have a market in the UK and elsewhere that of course thema codes would be very helpful. So that is something we're starting to discuss. Actually this week, we've brought it up in our last team meeting. So.
Okay, great, thanks very much. Yuli, do you want to chime in with more?
Sure. So I think a pain point that I can think of is the disconnect between the data that publishers supply and the data that gets ingested into the supply chain. So not all retailers are taking the same data, and there is a lot of data that's available, a lot of rich data that's available with Onyx 3.0 that might not ever be seen by who it's intended for. Specifically at Kobo, we receive a full Onyx feed, but we don't necessarily use all of that data. And another pain point that I can think of is I think publishers still using Onyx 2.0 is a big one, and not providing enough rich data in their Onyx feeds. And some publishers are sending Kobo specific spreadsheets for their metadata. I know that it's sometimes hard for publishers, especially small publishers, to make the transition to Onyx 3.0. And some smaller publishers don't produce their own metadata, and they rely on maybe distributors for that. So it may be that distributors haven't made the switch to Onyx 3.0, but I think the conversion process is a discussion that should be happening if it's not happening already. And yeah, there's definitely a big benefit to using Onyx 3.0.
That's yeah, but we could have a whole webinar just on that. Maybe I'll move on. I'll move on to the thing. We're about it's around 2:30, so about halfway through. And you're up because you're already on screen, so I'll just ask you. Now metadata is supposed to be a solution that supports book marketing, and that could be successes, that could be failures, but do you have a success that you can contribute that metadata actually built for either like House of Anansi or that you're aware of at Kobo? Like something that is like needs this thing to be driven and it's actually making money for you?
I think for me, the biggest thing is the backlist titles. So a lot of times backlist titles get overlooked when it comes to staying on top of metadata and current trends. But of course, like rich metadata can be very helpful and can boost discoverability and the relevance for those books, and might be able to gain new readership. I also think when it comes to Backlist, updating things like subjects and keywords is really useful, and make sure that those books aren't too dated or fail during ingestion. Yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely focus on Backlist has been really helpful when I was at House Finanzi. So we did do a big metadata revamp for our Backlist, which I don't know that I can, I don't know that I can speak too much about the success of that, but I definitely think it helped with, we did launch a new website, and it definitely helped us spotlight some titles and just kind of clean up some of that data and give some of our Backlist titles a good push, especially titles that might be more relevant today as different themes and topics come up.
I had, in my experience, metadata probably never comes down to a single thing. It's like a system. So I appreciate the emphasis on that fixing your backlist or all the metadata is relevant to actually improving things, which is, I think, actually quite true. My screen is now changed, so now everybody's on it all at once. So I can't just like force it onto one person, but do either Nick or Marion want to chime in at this point, loosen it up?
Sure, I will. As far as measuring success on metadata, I think it's a difficult one to measure. Adding, timely to the minute information like award nomination wins and advance praise quotes, etc., could contribute to sales success. It is difficult to measure though. Even adding keywords, which I know is a big thing at Amazon. Do we know that it's because of the keywords that sales have increased, or is it some other factor? Like, for example, we're still in it right now, the COVID pandemic. One of the things that we did over the last while was to supply library wholesalers with full interiors like we do right now with Catalyst. And what we have seen, this was actually done within the last year and a half, and what we've seen is that the libraries have bounced back to pre-lockdown levels. And we think it's because of the data that we have supplied to them. But again, it's difficult to measure whether that was the factor or whether it was some other factor that contributed to the increase in sales.
My marketing heritage dates back all the way into direct mail, and it's always been a problem that direct mail was famous for costing money, and it was only when you stopped doing it that you could measure the sales that it was perhaps gaining. You can never prove their existence. But Nick, any successes at Coach House that come to mind?
Yeah, it's hard to measure the successes, but I think the successes are there. They're perceived and imagined in my mind. And we've started since COVID, we've started to pay more attention to our website activity, which has increased since COVID, and our sales in general to compare and do analysis. And I do attribute some of the changes I'm about to mention to increased sales, especially in our ebook market. We've been really focusing on Backlist. I know we're not the only publisher to be doing that. So some of the things we've been doing, I have access to, I call them like metadata health reports to see how Backlist titles are performing across certain platforms, for example, Amazon, and then go in and update that narrative. Like perhaps the main description is too short, or could just use updating in terms of language. If there are reviews that are missing, anything that can help in that way. So we've been somewhat aggressively tackling that for our deep backlist. We have about I can't remember the exact number, but it would be between 350 and 400 titles in total. So the backlist is big enough that that's a big project. In terms of hard data, we've about a couple months ago, we decided to overhaul our ebook pricing, and this applied to the whole backlist. It was really inconsistent before that. Some prices were set way too low, some were way too high. So we standardized that pricing system, and I think that has helped with sales in general. And then we're applying that new pricing system moving forward. And one of the more strategic things we're doing for keywords and with Amazon in mind is we've picked a list of key backlist titles. So we haven't done it for all; we just don't have the resources for it. But the titles that we thought could benefit from this boost, and for a time we met as a team. Weekly, bi-weekly, and we went through 8 to 10 of those backlist titles and generated keywords together as a team. Just a really quick brainstorming session, and we found that to be really useful. So those are some of the things that we've been doing in metadata that I really think has boosted marketing and therefore sales. And on the front list side, just our main descriptions for previously we were mostly just using the back cover copy. We started to rethink of main descriptions as being something different and targeting sort of their description and the wording, where we don't have as much restraints, of course, as you do when you're working on back cover copy for doing those descriptions, and making sure as much as possible we're including things like all of the reviews, endorsements, blurbs, reviews of previous editions, awards, all of that really good golden metadata to put into our front list to really push things forward. Tom, I think you're on mute. I think you're talking, but you are on mute.
I clicked the button. I'm surprised I didn't just turn my camera off. I've got questions come in, and it seems it seems to be an extension off this. So I think I'll just insert it here rather than holding it to the end. So Nick mentioned the challenge in choosing the right keywords and BISAC codes to support marketing, and you've talked even more about that. How do you handle books that serve multiple markets? For example, a book that is well suited for the trade, but also might have an audience within K-12 or higher ed markets. Do you go for multiple codes, keywords? Do you use audience codes to try and differentiate some of these things? Do you prioritize one market over another? I mean, any strategy involved in that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I started to answer it and then I started speaking, so I stopped answering it. So I'm glad to just speak verbally about it. We do at Coach House, we have a number of titles that do have overlapping markets. We're a trade, like we publish fiction and poetry. We also have a number of nonfiction books that we publish, and we do have a small academic market that we pay attention to. We don't prioritize right now. It's a really good question. I can think about it more after this session, because we're currently not prioritizing. We are prioritizing, sorry, the selection of BISACs and keywords for the trade market, but perhaps I should be thinking more about how to leverage those aspects of the metadata to also bolster the higher ed and academic market that we play in. So in terms of just selecting BISACs and keywords, we're only prioritizing our trade market.
Okay, thank you. Have we lost Marion? I can't see her. Oh, I'm sorry, you are there. It's just it's turned off. Do either of you two have any comments on the multiple market type mentality, like moving between them? It's not really a question that Raincoast deals in, but you might deal with it in the sense of you're taking books from other markets and then trying to push them into ours. So it might be on your side understood better as they're giving us information appropriate to another market, and now we have to try to make it work for Canada. But certainly Kobo is
I don't know that I can really comment on. I need to give it some thought. I don't have an immediate response to that.
Okay. Any Kobo thoughts that you might have, Yudalee?
Yeah, that's also something that I would need to give some thought about. I don't have anything to add right now.
Well, all I can say is really good questions often take thought, and BookNet Canada has this blog post that is always looking for content. So if anybody gets some thought in on this and wants to like put it down on paper for us, we'd be happy to publicize it. 2:38, 20 minutes to go. I'm just trying to choose. We have sort of a list of questions. Maybe I should just open it up. I mean, does anybody have something that they would like to talk about or comment on, or questions they want to ask other panelists about stuff that they said? Just if there's anything communal that you want to engage in, just give me a thumbs down if you just don't want to go here at all. Nobody is leaping in, so I'm just going to go to my canned questions that you're more prepared for. That's all I'm going to do. What are some of the biggest challenges you or your team faces when it comes to metadata? But what's maybe really important, what's actually been changing, like say over the past 3 years? And again, you may be thinking more on less of an Nancy on this, but you have a bit of a disadvantage. But things have been changing an awful lot. I mean, part of it is Onyx 3.0, which has come up. Part of it is just like growth. Part of it is just dependency. I mean, what are your biggest challenges there?
I can start with that question. And I think Caroline Walker in the Q&A has asked, it maps onto this, so I'll just read it out. What mistakes are made and incorrect, when mistakes are made, sorry, and incorrect data gets out in the world, how do you fix that? How do you claw it back? The first thing I do is panic, which is about every 7 minutes of my job every day, and then worry if it was my fault or someone else's, because of course I take due sense of responsibility with the metadata that I manage. But I think we're not I hope we're not the only publisher, because since COVID, to answer the question that Tom started as well, and my goal is to answer both of these questions or respond to them. Since COVID, we have been doing things more last minute and changing information more frequently. Whether like shipping needs have changed and the supply of certain materials, distributors and platforms are changing. Of course, everyone is responding to the changing market and changing online activity and due to COVID. And so of course, we're trying to keep up with all of those changing trends and needs and area and where to put our focus in. So we have been, and of course the challenge is therefore that it's just become even harder to control the metadata. So incorrect information does get out, or I wouldn't even say it's incorrect, it's just suddenly outdated. It was up to date and correct yesterday, but today it is not. For example, we just updated a subtitle for one of our books that isn't coming up super soon, but it's not that far off into the future. And I'm worried that that subtitle, that lingering now outdated subtitle that was correct as of yesterday, will still be showing up in places longer than I'd like it to be. So I think that is one of the challenges we're facing as a publisher. Again, I hope I'm not the only we're not the only publisher facing that. What do? I fix the metadata immediately, fix or update it. And then I make sure we have an assistant at Coach House. She's our digital assistant. And one of the things that we've gotten her to do somewhat recently that we found very helpful is to do a manual check. I think she's doing it weekly, it might be bi-weekly, of some key platforms like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc., and checking our front list titles and just manually going through them, just quickly going to each URL, looking at a handful of those titles. It's a different one each week, and then reporting back to me any inconsistencies that she sees between them or how they're displaying. That might be a problem on the vendor side. For example, like we'll often see, I can't think of an example, I don't want to say one anyways, but for example, like if the metadata might be correct, but it's displaying incorrectly on that one platform, then that's something where our follow-up is to contact that vendor directly and try to see what the issue is and why that information isn't either updated or displaying incorrectly, or it might be actually something in our metadata that has been missed and needs to be corrected. And so it's flagged that way. It's a pretty manual process, but it's working for us. And it's been really helpful to find some issues. They're already out there, but of course you don't know. What I put in the metadata and what shows up on 100 different websites is entirely different and quite inconsistent. So I think it's a good strategy and we have the resources for it. So that's really helped in terms of what we do when we have either incorrect or outdated metadata.
Do you, for anyone, I guess, except for Marion, but do you find there's a difference in the ability to correct digital metadata versus print metadata?
That's a good question. No, I think my answer is no, but I might have to think on that more.
It's not really fair to ask someone from Kobo because, of course, Kobo will fix metadata at a drop of a hat and make it perfect at all times. Yes. We know that. Eulalie, going back to the original question, which I have to remind myself because I'm losing it on my own sheet. So what has changed an awful lot for you in the past 3 years at your jobs as you handle the metadata, or changed the most? And what are the challenges that, well, maybe your new job is presenting to you? That might be a good way for you to answer that question.
I think a challenge that I see is that some publishers are not using the metadata to their advantage. So for example, if a publisher is not using a certain code and maybe never have supplied it in the past, they might continue to not supply it. And for us specifically at Kobo, we do get some publishers requesting us to manually put in a code. For example, they might request for us to withdraw a book from sale, and we know that that is an Onyx code that they can use, but instead they might reach out for us to do that manually. So just, yeah, I think that is a challenge, just getting publishers to use their Onyx data to the best of their ability, not just for us, but for other retailers as well, so that there's just a consistent set of metadata so that they don't have to reach out to one retailer and another retailer at another time, just to supply that in their feed right off the bat.
Well, that lack of trust in the metadata, being a drag on the business, as I guess is one of the things that came up there. That's something that I would think that you might want to comment on, Marion, because you run into the problem of someone in the US publishing a book, say a biography, an autobiography by Woody Allen, and then deciding that was a bad idea, and perhaps needing like you to modify what you've done. Problems like that come up, that they could be handling through the metadata and seamlessly interacting with the community, but somehow making it into a problem that you have to deal with. So,
right, and I think there, even if we are notified that there's an issue, if the publisher doesn't fix the data and send us corrected data, it would get overwritten. So we could make the manual change, but the next Onyx feed that has incorrect data in it would just overwrite it. But I wanted to expand a bit more on challenges if Eulalie is finished providing her input. So I mentioned before, we have a lot of titles and we get a lot of metadata. I think one of the challenges is just managing all of that and ensuring the consistencies. Currently we have, I do the initial processing, but then it goes on to a data analyst and an inventory coordinator. And with the volume of data that we get, even though we have all of those levels of investigation and review, things can still slip through the cracks, and it's not until some end user gets it that or sees it that we're notified and have to make a change. And then the other thing that I mentioned before, something that's changed in the last 3 years, would be the fact that we do have more gift product, and we're trying to market that in an appropriate way. it's certainly seen an increase in that in the last few years, but we're working on it, and hopefully with this new website that we're putting together, that will be handled as well. What else was I going to say? Oh, just, you know, one thing that we introduced in the last year or so was customized feeds, customized Onyx feeds to different recipients, depending on whether a specific title can be displayed on Indigo or an Amazon, or whether it's exclusive to other markets. So we introduced that about a year or so ago. It used to be that someone from marketing would shout out to someone in systems, oh, you've got to block this title for so-and-so, but it can go out to this recipient. And so we implemented a system where the user could manage that more effectively. So it's really in the hands now of marketing and not systems, which helps a lot just from the perspective of having them own the data. I don't think that there's any, oh, sorry, there is one other thing, and that is more publishers that are carrying books that don't have English language, or they carry special characters. And that's been a problem for us because of the ERP that we system that we have. So often a special character will get misinterpreted and then sent out incorrectly. And again, this is something on our list of tasks. I laugh because I've been with Raincoast for 6 years now, and we're up to task number 2,447 as of this morning. And we usually have at least 10% of those open at any given time, probably more than that by now, just because of the volume of requests and issues that come up. So it is something that we're looking at, but it's a fairly significant change to address changing our system to handle special characters effectively.
I can certainly second the specialized character problem. It's something that you, well, I mean, you can hear somebody commenting on helping a publisher produce an ebook using specialized characters, and then consider that the Onyx feeds are basically the equivalent of that being transmitted from system to system to system, and well, results vary. You, Lily, a question came in on the chat for what you were talking about. Do you or does Kobo entertain such requests like corrections to manually enter codes or change Onyx data not through a feed? I mean, do you accept them by email? How do they come in, and how do you accept them?
If the data doesn't come in a feed, there is a Kobo specific spreadsheet that we do accept. But we have had situations where publishers have reached out and asked us just in a separate way to do that, which, you know, we would encourage them to use their Onyx feed, but we do that manual change for them.
Unmute Tom.
We actually have the same thing at Raincoast, where some publishers will send data to us via an Excel spreadsheet, again, formatted in a way that we supply, so that we can upload it in the same manner as Onyx-driven data.
I mean, just out of curiosity, Nick, how many spreadsheets do you have to distribute to supplement your Onyx feed?
Not a lot. So not a lot. So in our audiobook side of Coach House, I have to provide the information through spreadsheets. But outside of that, everything is delivered through our Onyx feed. So I don't have to deal with a lot of it in terms of our main list of titles.
And I guess just to supplement that, how many of you are the feeds that your Onyx feeds that you're supplying, are they largely now moving into Onyx 3.0 outside of Canada, or are they you still heavily 2.1?
On our, so we use Book One. This is one of my pain points, that we're still using two different systems. So when I have to update metadata, I am doing it in two different systems, hopefully consistently every time. So on the Book One side, were transitioned into 3.0, and they made an update. It was a while ago now, but it's really nice because I really like reviewing the raw Onyx every once in a while and taking a look at it. And now I have the ability to review both the 2.0 and the updated 3.0 version. So I appreciate that and having access to it. So on that side, yes. On the and so we're using Book One for we distribute that feeds out to our core source for our digital books distributed in Canada, and then to Raincoast for our print books in Canada. And then on the US side, with different rights, we use a different course, our US core source system, which is why I'm inputting the system in two different places at the moment. We would really like to change that, but when I first started at Coach House, November 2019, we were putting it in 4 different systems. So 2 is better than 4. So progress.
We are getting down to the last little bit, so I would encourage anybody who has a question to get it up into the chat. So we do have kind of like one of these good end questions, which if nothing else comes up. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started working with metadata? One of those, just give us a final thought here. You, Lily.
So when I started working with metadata about 3 years ago, I was applying both Onyx 3.0 and Onyx 2.1, but at the time I didn't really know the significance between the two, and I didn't know how much more rich data I could include with Onyx 3.0. I didn't really realize the authority that I could have over my metadata. And I think that's still true for a lot of publishers today. And I think for me, if I were to go back in time, I would just kind of more focus on understanding the why of Onyx 3.0, and why it's beneficial, and why it makes more sense, how it can improve discoverability and accessibility. So I think just taking those small steps to transition to Onyx. I mean, at the time we had already started supplying Onyx 3.0, but I think just taking small steps at understanding that significance and implementing more data would have been really helpful.
I love to say that there is an entire decade of development in Onyx 3.0 just waiting for use by the supply chain. Marion, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that the importance of keywords is a huge one. While I said that we weren't sure that we could measure the success of keywords, I think it is very important, especially for us with the increase in our business with Amazon. It used to be only 15% of our business, and in the last year or so, it's almost doubled in terms of our relationship with them. And so, and of course, because they use keywords to such a great extent, it's certainly something that we are working to augment. One thing that we did, I guess it was also about a year or so ago, we did a lot of work during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, was to allow the end users to view the keywords that are supplied to us by the publisher, but then we also added a field so that we could add our own keywords, and they get concatenated with the publisher supplied keywords when they get sent out in our feeds. So yeah, I would say keywords is a big one, and the users are working more towards augmenting that field in our system so that we can push it out to our or the population to whom we sell.
Sorry, there was one question. This is an interesting question, seeing how you've noticed an increase in increased business with Amazon by using keywords. No, I just muted somehow. I don't know how I did that. Anyway, have you noticed any effect from keywords with any other business partner? Or is it entirely Amazon?
Well, interesting question, because what we do notice is that the keywords that we send out, let's say to Indigo, may not be properly formatted. So it's, Amazon, I think, has done a really good job of ingesting keywords, because I guess they put a lot of focus on that, but we do find that other websites are not quite as good. So, and again, to say that the entire increase in business with Amazon is as a result of keywords might be incorrect. It could also be because of the situation that we're in the world right now, where a lot of people were ordering online. So, we can say keywords. I'm sure that had an impact. Was it the entire impact? I'm not really sure.
Okay, well, we're just coming on to 3 now, but Nick, any final thoughts?
What I wish I knew now at the beginning, just very quickly, number one, I already said this, but that it's a giant game of whack-a-mole, so just enjoy the game, or you're in the wrong job. And I would say I started in publishing, working in ebook production, specifically running an XML first workflow for a large academic publisher. And I guess what I wish I knew at the beginning, especially when I started to work more specific, and I still manage ebook production, but it's a much smaller part of my job now. What I wish I knew when I started to take on managing metadata and distribution more is just how powerful a tool it is for marketing. So I'm so glad that was one of the specific questions that we talked about here as a group today as well. And I wish I understood that better on the outset, because I was only, for a long time, I think I was only considering hard metadata. And I knew the other parts existed, but I didn't really understand their importance. And now I do much more so, and I will continue to grow in that area and look forward to it. But it's something I wish I had a better understanding. Just how powerful metadata is for marketing, I think, is a really key takeaway here.
Great. That was I'm very happy to have been here. So thanks very much for this great discussion. And BookNet Canada really appreciates having you. Before we go, we'd love if you could provide us feedback on the panel and the registration process. We'll drop a link link to the survey in the chat. Please take a couple of minutes to fill it out. We need that type of information. We'll also be emailing you a link to a recording of this session as soon as it's available. Lastly, as always, we'd like to thank the Department of Canadian Cultural Heritage for their support to the Canada Book Fund. And thank you again to our panelists and to all of you for attending. Thank you very much.